Tonight, tapping into a new market, Ontario will allow the sale of beer and wine in convenience stores. The sweeping changes.
It's better if you have more options.
Taking stock of the rules across the country. Denied. The truck driver behind the Humboldt Broncos crash loses his bid to avoid deportation.
Mr. Sidhu is in a prison in his own mind.
Also, Quebec's controversial tuition hike and language rules for out-of-province students. Plus, seeking asylum, the plea from a Hong Kong democracy activist in Canada.
They don't respect any kind of human rights.
And a special holiday fly-along.
Ho, ho, ho!
Santa's here.
Santa Claus is coming to town in some remote northern communities.
Merry Christmas!
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. Canada's most populous province is bringing in some of the biggest changes in alcohol sales in its history. Ontario loosening restrictions on where consumers can buy beer, wine, cider, and ready-to-drink cocktails, but keeping them for spirits such as vodka and gin. The changes won't come into effect for this holiday season. CTV's Adrian Gobriel on the timeline and the cost of the convenience.
Others, in Ontario at any rate, have something else to bite their nails about: booze now.
Since Prohibition, privatized alcohol sales have mostly been on ice across parts of the country.
We got to start treating people like adults.
With Ontario now poised to uncork new legislation, its premier was in a celebratory mood today.
I'm tempted to go back there, crack up one of those, whatever they are, ciders, and take a little swig.
Wine, beer, ciders, coolers, and seltzers will all be available at Ontario gas stations, big box, and convenience stores. Some grocery stores have already been selling beer and wine, but that's being expanded. Up to 8,500 new locations will be able to sell the select products, with Ontario joining Quebec as the only province to offer multiple alcohol offerings at corner stores. Across the country, there's a patchwork of different rules and regulations. In British Columbia, beer, wine, and spirits are sold in provincially owned and private liquor stores. Alberta operates a privatized liquor retail industry. In Newfoundland and Labrador, beer made in the province is available at some convenience stores. There's questions tonight about the homework the Ford government did ahead of going public with its plan. Public Health Ontario tells CTV News the province never included them in the consultation process ahead of today's big announcement. In an email, they shared that there's evidence that greater physical availability of alcohol is associated with an increase in per capita alcohol use and alcohol-related harms.
This is an evolution that we've been seeing.
The Ontario government did consult with MAD Canada. They're focused on minimizing any spike in drunk driving.
If you're going to increase sales, which we know is going to happen, we also need to bring in the other measures that offer the protection to reduce the risk.
Stores will be able to sell boozy beverages as early as 7 a.m., though Ontario will have to wait for the new rollout.
I think it's wonderful at last, but why wait until 2026? Why? Why not right tomorrow?
The delay, in part, is because Ontario is currently locked into an agreement with the province's beer store, which runs until the end of 2025. Today's announcement was a little bit light on some other details, Omar. The provincial government has yet to commit funding to hire more officers to inspect stores like this one to ensure they're compliant.
All right, Adrian, thank you. And some Canadians may have to spend less at the drugstore under a new pharmacare plan. The details still aren't out, but there is a new deadline. The NDP and the Liberals agreed today to introduce legislation by March 1st of next year as part of their supply and confidence deal. The NDP has been pushing for a universal single-payer program, but the Liberals have raised concerns about the cost. The driver who caused the Humboldt Broncos bus crash that killed 16 people has lost his latest bid to stay in Canada and avoid deportation to India. CTV's Bill Fortier on the rookie trucker's next steps and how the families of the victims are reacting tonight.
The tragic scene is still etched in the memory of a nation more than 5 years after the highway crash that left 16 people dead and 13 injured, most of them young hockey players. Tonight, Jaskirat Singh Sidhu, the man behind the wheel of the truck that hit the Humboldt Broncos bus, is one legal step closer to deportation.
He and his wife are very disappointed. They were hoping for a better outcome. It was not to be.
Sidhu is currently on parole. Earlier this year, the Canadian Border Services Agency and a government official recommended sending him back to India. Sidhu applied to the federal court to set aside that decision, arguing the CBSA ignored his previously clean record and relied on letters from the public pushing for deportation. The judge disagreed, saying in his decision, "I find that the processes followed by the officer and the delegate were fair, having regard to all of the circumstances."
We were glad to hear this information this morning.
For some parents of the young hockey players killed, this decision brings comfort.
We just want them to go away. We think that in our lives, that'll make our lives better.
For others still grieving, this is just another chapter in the excruciating ordeal.
You know, while I feel sad for Mr. Sidhu here that he has to leave, but, you know, for our family, we're just going to continue going forward.
Sidhu now has one last attempt to stay in Canada. His lawyer says he will seek to maintain his permanent resident status on humanitarian and compassionate grounds.
They have a child now, a child with very high medical needs. And so it would be extremely disruptive if he was deported.
A deportation hearing in the new year is essentially a formality. Then Sidhu will get another hearing for that application on permanent residency status. If that fails, Sidhu could be deported within a few months. Omar.
All right, Bill, thank you. Quebec revealed today it is slightly softening its tuition rate hike for many out-of-province students at English language universities. But there's a catch. Starting in 2025, most students at McGill, Concordia, and Bishops will be required to have intermediate proficiency in French when they graduate. And beginning next fall, out-of-province students at Concordia and McGill will have to pay $12,000 in tuition, less than the $17,000 the province had floated, but more than the current fee of almost $9,000. Bishops is exempt from the hike because of its location outside Montreal. The universities warned the changes will lead to a drop in enrollment and that they'll lose millions if students end up studying in provinces where it's cheaper. Here's CTV's Vanessa Lee.
Montreal's storied McGill University says the impact will be devastating.
It is still twice as high a tuition as compared to our competition outside Quebec.
While Quebec is reducing the tuition hike for out-of-province students, it is adding a new French requirement. 80% of students will have to reach an intermediate level 5 proficiency by the time they graduate. McGill and Concordia could see their funding reduced if the target isn't met. Bishops University in the Eastern Townships was given an exemption.
It's really protecting French. I think we need to understand that there is an issue of French in Montreal, particularly in Montreal.
But many say meeting that French standard is simply unrealistic and will require the equivalent of a full semester of classes to reach an intermediate level.
It's not only even an issue of effort. It can technically not be done. It is academically not possible to do it.
What the government has effectively done is set us up to fail. They've set objectives which are not realizable. They're not supported by any data.
The government's original plan to double tuition at English universities triggered immediate backlash, with concerns over the economic impact. Some see today's measures as a political move targeting Anglophones as a way to shore up nationalist support, with François Legault's CAQ plummeting in the polls.
The government were trying to devise a plan to starve the English-speaking universities out of existence. It would look like this.
McGill, which has been part of the fabric of Quebec for 2 centuries, says it won't rule anything out, including opening a satellite campus in another province. With application deadlines weeks away, time is running out to convince prospective students it's still worth studying here. Vanessa Lee, CTV News, Montreal.
Israel's defense minister said today the war with Hamas will last, quote, months, as the country's top ally, the United States, urged more care and focus on how to save civilian lives. Here's CTV's Kevin Gallagher.
Heavy Israeli bombardment rocked the Gaza Strip, burying people in rubble and overwhelming hospitals with injured Palestinians, many of them children.
Do you want Israel to scale back its assault on Gaza?
A growing concern for Israel's most powerful ally,
I want them to be focused on how to save civilian lives, not stop going after Hamas, but be more careful.
U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan telling Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu military strikes into Gaza need more precision. After that meeting, Netanyahu promised to continue fighting Hamas until it's eliminated. Something Israel's defense minister predicts will take several months, maybe longer. Israel's army released this video today showing men laying down weapons they accuse of being terrorism suspects, while the Gaza Health Authority claims 70 of its staff from a nearby hospital were detained by the IDF. In the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority called for the international community to step in and stop the violence.
What we need is to see an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the materialization and manifestation of a two-state solution.
Canada is also calling for a two-state solution, as 5 Liberal MPs sent a letter to the presidents of 25 Canadian universities asking if calling for genocide against Jewish people violates school policy.
There's a feeling throughout the Jewish community that anti-Semitism is not taken as seriously as other forms of hate.
This after U.S. university presidents faced controversy for their answers about anti-Semitism at a congressional committee.
Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
4 of the 5 Liberals that signed this letter also spoke out against Canada voting in favor of that UN resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, Omar, because it didn't condemn Hamas.
All right, Kevin, thank you. Authorities in 3 European countries believe they've foiled a suspected terror plot connected to the war in the Middle East. Police in Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands arrested a total of 7 people, including 4 suspected Hamas members, on suspicion of planning attacks against Jewish institutions. A Hamas spokesperson denies that any of its members were arrested, claiming the reports were meant to erode Palestinian support in Europe. Russian President Vladimir Putin stood firm on his plans for Ukraine today when he took to the airwaves for a marathon year-end news conference lasting more than 4 hours. Putin claims Russian forces are strengthening their position on all fronts of the conflict and will push ahead with the war unless Kyiv takes a deal. Police in Hong Kong expanded their hunt for pro-democracy activists living overseas and offered bounties for information leading to their arrest. A 27-year-old woman in Canada isn't on the list, but received a strong warning today that she could be. CTV's Judy Trin spoke to her.
Hong Kong police roll out wanted posters for democracy activists labeled as fugitives.
A reward of 1 million Hong Kong dollar in respect of each wanted person is being offered by the police.
The activists are accused of violating China's national security law after organizing protests.
There is still a very strong sense of fear in my heart.
In Toronto, Agnes Chow watched in alarm as police directed a warning at her. Police say Chow too will be considered a criminal if she does not come back at the end of December. Since the 2014 Umbrella Revolution, Chow has been among the youth leaders pushing against Chinese authoritarianism. She was jailed for 7 months, and for the past 3 years, she's been under constant state surveillance.
I underwent a series of interrogations, and I was even being forced to write repentant letters and thank you letter to the police, and I was being forced to go to the mainland China for a propaganda trip.
Earlier this year, Chow got approval to pursue a master's degree overseas as long as she returned for regular check-ins. But under China's national security law, the activist could be arbitrarily detained. So Chow publicly declared she's seeking political asylum in Canada.
If anything happened in mainland China, no one will be able to come to rescue me or to help me. So I don't want to be forced to do something that I don't want to do anymore. I just want to live freely.
But there are no guarantees she will be completely safe here.
Bad guys can travel from point A to point B in a heartbeat. In terms of information, technology, etc., they can locate people extremely easy.
Chow is taking precautions to keep her family and friends safe. But Omar, she's unsure whether or not she will continue advocating for human rights in Hong Kong.
All right, Judy, thank you. Coming up.
We do not feel that this is a resignable offense.
Holding on in the House, Speaker Greg Fergus poised to keep his job. An MP with the federal party leading the call for the Speaker of the House of Commons to resign faced his own scrutiny today. Both cases involving videos that are being called inappropriate and partisan. Here's CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver.
Oral questions. Greg Fergus may not have been in the House presiding over the political debate today, but it's a role a Commons committee says he can keep.
This was a mistake that he made. However, we do not feel that this is a resignable offense.
Earlier this week, Fergus was in the hot seat, brought before committee to explain why he recorded what's being called a partisan video tribute in his speaker's robes.
It's such a great opportunity to speak about my longtime friend, John Fraser.
Fergus says he thought the message would be viewed privately, but it played at the Ontario Liberal Election Party.
Regardless of it being aired privately or publicly, I should never have recorded it. I apologize unreservedly.
That committee reviewing Fergus's conduct has recommended the Speaker pay a fine to cover any use of parliamentary resources and issue another apology. The House administration is also tasked with creating new guidelines on impartiality and nonpartisanship.
Even though he was elected as a Liberal, he's supposed to try to rise above that and act in an impartial way.
Today's report is not calming the opposition's calls for Fergus's resignation.
It is with regret that Conservatives call on the current Speaker to resign.
Mr. Scheer. But the man leading that charge for the Conservatives, former Speaker Andrew Scheer, faced his own scrutiny today after it was revealed he had to reimburse the House $500 for this video.
Hello, Conservative members in Oxford, Ontario.
The endorsement for a Conservative by-election candidate was shot from his parliamentary office, breaking House of Commons protocol.
It's not acceptable for anybody, not acceptable for Mr. Scheer, not acceptable for Mr. Fergus, and we're going to make sure that those kinds of things don't happen again.
The Conservatives say Scheer's case is completely different than Fergus's because he wasn't serving as an impartial speaker at the time. The NDP say Fergus is on probation and they're ready to introduce a motion of non-confidence if they see fit in the future. Annie Bergeron-Oliver, CTV News, Ottawa.
Canada's newest multi-millionaire has claimed his massive prize. Noel Patricio of Toronto won the record Lotto 649 $68 million gold ball jackpot in the September draw. He plans to take a family vacation to Italy and get season tickets to the Toronto Raptors. Sounds like a great way to celebrate. Still ahead.
I don't want to say the calm before the storm, but I expect an active spring.
Gearing up for what's being called the Great Adjustment in Canada's housing market. If you're looking to buy a home in the new year, be prepared to pay more. That's the latest prediction on the housing market. CTV's Sarah Plowman on what's being dubbed the Great Adjustment.
John Cook bought a house in Fredericton today. Part of his thinking was buy now to avoid bidding wars soon.
And you end up paying far more than you would want to, or far more than the house is necessarily worth.
A snapshot of Canada's real estate market shows from October to November, home sales, prices, and listings all dropped, a signal that the real estate roller coaster is leveling off. But economists hint not so fast.
Demand for housing in Canada has never been stronger, so it looks really quiet, but I think I don't want to say the calm before the storm, but I expect an active spring.
Royal LePage is forecasting home prices to go up next year. A slight bump at first, but should the Bank of Canada cut interest rates as expected? By the end of 2024, the real estate company predicts home prices to jump nearly 6%, hiking the median price to nearly $850,000. Its CEO is calling this a tipping point.
A realization that 2% mortgages are dead and gone, and that we will be living with mid-single-digit mortgage rates for the foreseeable future.
While home prices have dropped in Ontario, this economist notes that's not the case everywhere.
The prices are still rising in quite a few places: Alberta, Saskatchewan, basically the entire East Coast.
Cook is glad he bought now and glad to move back to Fredericton.
When I looked at what do you get for what you're paying, I found it to be reasonable in today's kind of inflated market.
Based on this forecast, Royal LePage predicts by the end of next year, home prices will have essentially climbed back to their pandemic peak. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, Fredericton.
There was a strange sight at a busy train station in New Jersey this morning because of a bovine intervention.
Good morning, all travelers. Due to a obstruction in the tracks.
That obstruction, as you can see, had long horns and was strolling on the tracks. The bull blocked service for nearly an hour. Definitely not your average passenger. Coming up,
Ho, ho, ho!
Santa rides into remote First Nations communities. If there's one person who personifies the magic of Christmas, it's Santa, who made an early trip to some of the most remote First Nations communities in Manitoba to spread some pre-holiday cheer. And Bureau Chief Jill Makashon was right there with him.
Santa is taking to the skies a little early this year, with some help from friends.
Ho, ho, ho!
Delivering 20,000 treat bags to Manitoba's most northern First Nations.
Merry Christmas! Bonabonabe!
The Santa Express has been bringing smiles to children in these remote communities for more than 20 years.
So, is today a pretty special day? Because Santa's here.
A partnership with the Northern First Nations group Manitoba, Kiwatanawi, Okimakanak, and Perimeter Airlines. Weather permitting, 20 First Nations will receive a special delivery from Santa over the coming days.
We are donating the flights so that the kids can see Santa, sometimes for the first time.
Winnipeg, every mall, you have that opportunity to take your kids and have a picture with Santa. But in First Nation communities, they've never really had that opportunity.
Until the ice roads are built in mid-January, the only way in or out of most of these northern communities is by plane, which is unaffordable for many families. Manitoba's northern First Nations have some of the highest child poverty rates in the country, and many of these communities are struggling with youth suicide. This small gesture of kindness is seen as a light.
It's more personal when Santa flies into the community. It gives them a sense of hope, you know. It's nice to see that.
For the little kids and the big ones, for those who may sometimes feel forgotten, the Santa Express reminds everyone of the magic of the season. Jill Makashon, CTV News, Mantosipi, Cree Nation.
Beautiful story. And that's a snapshot of this Thursday. Todd Vanderhayden will be here tomorrow for all of us at CTV National News. Thank you for watching and good night.